All right, so we're here to talk design systems, a little bit of Drupal, and a whole lot of the RISM Museum. So over the summer, we had the great pleasure of working with them again on another project. Last year, we did a talk at Design Week about our project with the museum side of things, relaunching their main website. And this year, what they wanted to do is start an online publication platform, or at least that's what we started calling it. But it quickly became something else, and that's sort of the surprise that we'll be talking about today. For them, they wanted a way to put their scholarly publications online quickly and easily. A lot of them go along with the exhibitions that they have, but this one coming up that they're working towards was called Raid the Icebox. It's a 50-year anniversary of Andy Warhol's installation in the late 60s. And they are celebrating that yet again with a lot of new exhibitions. They're letting a lot more artists do what Andy was able to do, which was basically raid the collection and put together shows that could create new context around the artwork. So they wanted a way to bring that to life on the web. That's what we'll be talking about. But first, just a quick little introduction. Hi, my name is Jay Hogue, Director of Design and UX here at Oomph. And I was the lead UX person on this project, along with Kathy Beck. Kathy helped to do a lot of the site building, the bulk of the site building, actually. And we both really collaborated hard to make this an interesting and flexible platform for artists and authors to use. We're also hiring. It would be remiss of me not to mention that. But we're an agency in Providence. We're headquartered here, but we do have 25% of our folks remote. So a couple caveats to start off. The subtitle of this talk is really the pleasant surprise of what creative clients can do with a powerful set of tools. If some of you are designers, if some of you have had to interface with clients before, that's not always the case. Sometimes you create this great system, create this great template, and they still manage not to use it as well as they could. This was quite the opposite. This was quite a surprise for us, and really a really great one. And I'll be talking about design systems in general a little bit, but what we did is in no way the design system. There's not really one way to do this. Design systems are a method. They're not, there's not one set of best practices necessarily there. So if you want to implement this, you can implement this in a myriad of different ways, and it really should change based on the brand and the client that you're working with. This project, we wanted to admit as well, is the exception, not the rule. We don't get to do this a lot. This was really a great opportunity for us. Usually, design systems or design projects are a lot more rigid. This one intentionally was very fluid. When we trained the client on the system, they went away and figured out how to break it. They really wanted to see where the edges were. So it was a very interesting way to work. And one of the other things we were kind of unleashed by was the fact that they were not interested in supporting older browsers. So we didn't have to worry about IE11 and the development community. That's a big deal. That means we could drop a lot of workarounds that would be necessary otherwise and really use a lot more cutting edge technology, which was great. And finally, for the folks here who are familiar with Drupal or Layout Builder, this project, this presentation is built in it. So I was able to use the platform to build this slideshow and talk about how it works. So a little bit of meta inception happening here, but that just proves how powerful the platform ended up becoming. So first, to start off, when I say design system, what do I actually mean? So you probably have heard about a lot of other organizations that have design systems. IBM has one called Carbon, Airbnb has one. A lot of large companies have what they call a design system, capital D, capital S. These are large platforms that document all the different elements they have to use, from typography to color to the way they use illustration and photography, down to what a call to action button looks like, what their email looks like. It can really encompass everything. When we say design system, it's more of a small d, small s. This is the start of something bigger, we hope. And this is more about a flexible way that they can lay out marketing pages, landing pages, editorial content in this case, and leverage multimedia to do that. Yeah, you can come on down in the front. We also made it, we've been thinking about these for a while. This is my third year probably working within this way of giving tools to authors, and we intentionally try to keep it platform agnostic. That means we're talking about Drupal, we're a Drupal shop, but it doesn't only apply to Drupal, and it doesn't only apply to the tools that Drupal gives you either. There are a number of ways we could solve this problem. We happen to use a couple that we'll be talking about, but they're not the only way. Another way to think about this, just to make it a little bit more clear, to use probably some terminology that you've seen before. It's a template system, which is not a design system, versus components. Templates are usually a rigid set of things on a page that an author has the ability to fill out. They have fields, they fill out a title, they fill out the body, maybe they pick an image. It's a way to do one thing. It does it well, but it does that one thing only. Components are more about flexible pieces of media, a large banner image, an image, video, body content, and those can be moved around at will. So the author is not hemmed into one way to use those pieces. They can use them in a myriad of different ways. One of them is more like an airplane kit, where you have a bunch of parts, but you can only build an airplane. And the other one is a little bit more like a Lego set, where you have a bunch of things that work together that are meant to harmonize, and you can build whatever you want. So that's really what we're trying to talk about here. So with the client, what problem were we trying to solve? And this was interesting because it started in a really fuzzy place. We were asking a lot of what-if questions. They came to us with a basic idea, but with no content. They really didn't know what people were going to produce with this. And they knew there was going to be a wide variety of content, from something that is more typically like a scholarly publication that goes into the history of the artwork in the show, to the biography of the artists involved, to something like what they were working towards now with Raid the Icebox and the Andy Warhol retrospective, where artists were going to really drive this and might do anything with this platform, might have just a single video up there, might have a 5,000 word essay. We really didn't know. So we were working around ideas. What ended up happening is that we gave them some wireframes of what we thought the design system framework could be. And again, they went away and tried to find where the edges were. They dreamed of what their artists might be producing and did their best guess to give us back something to work from. In the back of their minds, too, part of the charge here was they weren't interested in just creating this for themselves. Sure, that was the first thing they wanted to do, but they wanted to open source this platform. They wanted to make it available to Harvard, to Yale, to other museums, to smaller universities, to larger ones, because they knew this could be a powerful way to publish content on the web without a lot of guardrails, again. So that was in the back of their minds, but we weren't really sure how to solve that problem yet. And then for us, as an agency, we do this quite a bit. We do it in a couple different ways. And while every client is a special snowflake, we want to create tools that are going to be a solid foundation for us to create those one-offs from. So we wanted to see if Layout Builder in Drupal now could give us that foundation that would be more easily ported from one project to another. So that was working in the back of our minds too. So when they went back and did some design, they came back with something like this, which is actually fairly typical. Opens up with a big hero image. There's a little annotation there about, could this be a video? Could this autoplay? Some text, some imagery floating around on the page, and the conversation was, can these adhere to the top of the viewport? They've seen examples of that. Can things slide in, slide out, fade in, fade out? Can they autoplay video? For navigation on the UX side of things, what does the header look like? How do I access that? How do I move from one page in this publication to another? So we were really exploring some things, but it's still fairly fuzzy at this point. And then down here are certain examples of those scholarly things that we still had to do, like image credits, page credits, bibliography of things that they've referenced in this article, how others can reference this article and their scholarly work. So we had to support some of those fields as well. And then finally, at the bottom of the page, I was interested in making sure that no one could hit a dead end. So at the bottom, can we reintroduce the table of contents in a slightly different visual way to make sure that people can move horizontally through this publication, jump around from one artist to another, or jump around from one topic to another very easily. So that became like a very loose framework for what we were going to try to build. So that's a framework of what we talked about with the client, and then as a Drupal shop, we came back to them, okay, I think this is the tool that we want to use to do it. So in Drupal, right now, there's something called Layout Builder. And to back up a little bit, Drupal is one of the larger open source platforms available now. Open source means it's free software, but us as an agency, it's not free to customize. And our job is to take that platform and customize it to whatever the client needs. It can be anything from an e-commerce application, an e-commerce platform, to a simple marketing site, to a blog, etc. And we work with a lot of different agents, a lot of different nonprofit organizations, healthcare organizations, and others on Drupal all the time. So it's a really powerful platform to do that with. And what they have available is very extensible and flexible as well. So we have the option to turn these things on or off on a per project basis. So for RISD, we turned on everything that we had available to us for Layout Builder. And for the Drupal folks in the audience, this might make a little bit of sense. For others, it's fine. Just trust it's there. And there's one custom thing at the bottom that we had to create for RISD specifically. But that's a general way of what the back end starts to do and look like. To put that in a little bit more in perspective, if anyone's used a CMS before, they've probably seen screens like this. It's an admin screen. It's not very pretty. It's very functional, though. And there's a number of different fields that you get to lay out. You don't get a visual interface of what the page will look like typically on the front end when a regular user is going to see that. So there's a slight disconnect between the authoring experience and the consumption experience. But this is fairly typical of what some of these things look like. And actually, this is a publication page here. These are some of the available fields that someone has, again, for those scholarly bits, the page credits, the bibliography, etc. And then finally, again, a little bit more towards the Drupal audience, the cool thing, the great thing about Layout Builder that we found is that it gives us the ability to say, for this piece of content, we're going to let the author go crazy. We're going to give them the ability to manage layout, which is that button in the sort of middle there. For others, we don't have to do that. And actually, that's, now that we've done this project, that's how that's how we're typically working with Layout Builder in the future. Is we're using it, it's a powerful tool for us to build what these layouts look like, but to make a decision, the author can edit this one, they can't edit that one. So a real world example, this is another preview of what we've been working on, AVMA, American Veterinary Medical Association. Very different client, very different needs. Same platform, also using Layout Builder. What we decided to do is say, you know, a press release, we're going to lay this out in the admin, we're going to put the headline in a certain place and the publication date and the title, all in where you expect them to be. Now, this is built with Layout Builder, but the author doesn't get to edit this at all. They just fill in the fields in the back end like any other author would. So we know where things will go, and we make the fields smart enough, but they don't have the ability to really change this layout. Same thing with a regular article. Maybe it's a little bit prettier, but again, they have access to these fields and they can supply content or not. A better way to think about it now, so what Layout Builder will do as well is for a landing page. They have an annual convention. This is more of a marketing effort. This is something that shouldn't be inside a box. This should change from year to year. This should reflect the kind of content that they want to try to communicate on the page. So this one we said, okay, you have a set of components now to work with. We're going to unlock that, and you can change this layout on a year-to-year basis, on a day-to-day basis, if you really want to. So they have access to a component that basically is this headline and introduction. They have access to a pull quote and a body field. They actually have access to a countdown. We built them a special component that's just a countdown to the day that this convention starts. So by component, that means they decided to put it here, but if they wanted to move that up to the top, they could. If they wanted to put it inside a half column somewhere else, they could. So they have access now to be able to say, I want a photo there, I want content there, I want to switch it below. These are all distinct rows. And this will make more sense as I start to show you the way Layout Builder works for RISD. So this is a very different idea. This is taking those components again and laying them out into a page that communicates a single message. For this case, it was their annual convention. Now you get a little bit of an idea of how Drupal and Layout Builder can work for some people. This is now how it's going to work for RISD. So a tour of components. The publication platform, the exhibition platform, honestly, sorry, we started with publication, but we're moving on and thinking about it in a larger way, trying to remember to call it an exhibition platform now. It's built on two content types, and it sort of still kind of retains a little bit of print quality in that there's a publication, there's kind of like the book cover with a title and a cover image and some other information. And then there's a page or a book chapter. And that page can make a reference and be part of a single publication. And it has a couple extra fields, like I had mentioned, for those scholarly things, as well as 4 different fields for a table of contents. And that was so that we could make something really flexible for them. The initial table of contents we're launching with is one design, but we know later on down the road we might have 2, 3, 4 different layouts just for the table of contents that they'd want to switch between from one publication to another. So that the data structure is fairly straightforward. The navigation block that I showed you in that design mock-up is also fairly straightforward, but there's a number of things going on there. We want to show the title of the publication, but since this is also mobile responsive, it switches between the field for a short title and a long title, depending on how much room we have to work with. We have next, previous navigation in the middle, and then we have a few controls at the end for the viewer to control the font size, because they knew this was going to be a little hard to read. This might be something that people would need control over. There's a print icon, again, still, because their audience is scholarly. You might want to print this out, even though with all this video, I think that's a little nuts. And then there's a link for that thing at the end is a jump link that will take someone down to the citation block, where they can learn how to cite this publication in their own scholarly work. But now the more fun stuff. To lay out a page, you had seen in the convention page how it's sort of made of rows, made of long sections that go across the entire page. That's how Layout Builder basically works. And inside that, you have the option to give authors complete control over that content. So what we did was we came up with a couple different options for them. If they pick a single row, for example, they have a number of different widths they can pick that content will contain. It'll either go full width or it'll go something smaller. And we made sure to make these smart in the way that when I pick 25% as an author for desktop, I'm looking at it on a nice big screen. I don't want that to be a tiny little column probably for a mobile device. That doesn't make sense. So while I might be thinking, I think authors typically want to keep in one mindset. It's kind of difficult for them to author for all different viewports. They're going to be authoring in a desktop mindset. They pick what they need for desktop, but what we've done is make sure that no matter what, that selection is going to make sense on a mobile device as well. So 25% on desktop is not 25% on mobile. But the great thing is that the authors really shouldn't have to worry about that. It's just built in to the way the system works. Same basic idea for 2 columns. Again, 50-50 when we wanted to support that, but we're also supporting 25-75, 75-25, et cetera, et cetera. We've got all these options built into the way that works. And then we gave them 3 columns, which they don't use often, but it is there. And 3 columns, again, supports the more typical layout, but also supports these other stranger layouts that could be a little bit more fun to use. And these expose what I'm talking about as far as being a little bit more smart about the options we give someone. So if someone chose this layout, that shouldn't be what the mobile layout is. The mobile layout should be stacked, and it should present that content in a more legible fashion. As the viewport gets bigger, though, maybe that supports 50-50 over 100 instead. And then as desktop now, they get what they've actually picked. So again, these are a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes that the author shouldn't have to think about, but it gives them the ability to author desktop first and know or trust that there should be still a really good mobile experience under the hood. So now that I've gone through those illustrations, there's a couple more here for alignment. These are fairly straightforward. They don't really make too much difference unless you have multiple columns that you're working with. So for this, we have vertical alignment, but that's only going to be present when you have a longer column next to a shorter one. You won't really see that working. Same thing with horizontal. You're only going to see horizontal if you pick that 50% in a 100% section, and you'll be able to align that left, right, or center depending, but if it was 100%, not going to make it's not going to change anything. All right, so those animations were fun, but here's a video of how this actually works. So right now, I'm in the back end for this presentation. I'm editing this presentation right now. And the way it works in the back end here in Drupal is that there are these little dotted lines pop up to show you where the edges are, to show you where these sections are. Between every existing section is the ability to add another one. So you'll see the add section button appear again and again and again. That's the way that you add a new complete row. You'll also see that there's add block. Blocks are these discrete pieces of content. And they can go in existing columns already, or they can go in existing sections as new content. The cool thing is that they can be dragged and dropped around. So this becomes a more visual editor. Once I pick a section, I can't really change it. I can delete it, or I can change some things about it. I can't change the layout that it contains. But I can move blocks around from section to section. I could move them from the bottom of the page all the way to the top if I wanted to. The other thing we did, so the front-end experience has a lot of animations. It has a lot of interactivity. We wanted to strip that back for the admin. It's not a great authoring experience when things are flying in and moving around on you. So instead, we just label things with their effect so that the author has an idea of, oh yeah, I added an animation to that, or did what I just saved actually work? I don't see it, in this experience. So we wanted to make sure that they could quickly understand what they've been doing in the system already as they edit content. So now real quick, I'm clicking on configure section, and a tray pops up, and we get all the different options that are available to someone. Some of them that we've already talked about. So we have the alignment options. Those are pretty straightforward. We have a number of background colors. And for this client, we have some future ideas. So we ended up just abstracting the color names, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in order to help them with that, though, because that's a terrible naming convention, is to give them a little swatch preview of what that color is for this publication. The idea is that can change in the future. So I can pick a background color. I'll close that up. Here are my width options. So on the fly, if it's a 2-column, I can change its layout if I want to. And then there's a couple extra things. We just called them extra, but basically these are 2 powerful toggles. Sticky row means that that entire section, when it hits the top of the viewport, it'll stay there. And then hero means that the image that's been provided is the content. So that's, hero is a kind of a UX design term, meaning it's a giant image that takes up the entire page. So that's how that's controlled. It needs to act a little bit differently than some of these other blocks, so we had to make it special. And then again, with the idea of flexibility in mind always, we've provided a custom class field on almost everything. And this allows us to create quick little one-off things for them to use without having to build it into the entire system. That makes it easy to extend it and add more functionality to it as we go forward. But we also have the ability, if they're savvy enough, to use other classes, utility classes they're called, to really tweak the design on a element by element basis if they so choose. I've used that in this presentation quite a bit actually. So I'll close that. So that's for the section. That's for the entire row across the page. Here now, what we'll do is I'll take a quick look at configuring a block. So there's configure, which basically just means edit the content of. There's a title, there's a body field, optional background media that you can upload. And then in the editor itself, which is fairly WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. There's a number of stylistic options as well. We gave them really a plethora of things to play with. So that's how editing content looks. And then quickly, on top of that, there's something called style settings. And these are where there's a lot more magical stuff happening. So I can edit some of these things. Here's all of the animations we've made available to them. I can change it or choose a different one if I like. And then if I wanted to add something new, so these are some of the other options that we have available. So a particular block can have a different background color than its section. It can have different kind of spacing, zero spacing or much healthier, wider spacing. If it's a single column of content and we don't want to break this up into multiple columns, there's a column count option, which basically means now text can flow from one column to another in a more responsive fashion without having to say, I want this block here and that block there. It's a way to make multiple columns happen with really text-heavy components. And then we have animation applied in this case. We have a custom class applied in this case. So that's another way that people can really overtake the control of the design from the default to whatever they need to do in that instance. This is a quick little overview of what the back end looks like, what that authoring experience with Layout Builder looks like. I'll go through here as well and show you what adding something new can look like. So I'm adding a section. I'm going to choose a column, my alignment, my background. It can happen fairly quickly here. I'm okay with the default. I'm going to close that. I don't need any of those. And I add that. This really hasn't done much other than now giving me the ability to add a block to this new row. So otherwise, without a block inside of it, without content, it would just collapse. Here I have, I'm adding a video. So I'm adding, give it a quick little title for me to be able to tell which one it is in the admin. I can upload or choose from the library of videos I've already uploaded. But this is pretty quick to do, so I'm uploading a video. I'll give that the required title. I'll pick a category so I can more easily find it later. And then I have optional subtitle. I have an optional what's called a poster image, so that's like the first image you'll see before the video plays. They can control that if they like. And then there's a caption as well, that can play into accessibility a little bit. At the bottom here is what is kind of fun. So they're able to add a video and play it like a normal video, like I'm doing now. But they're also able to add a video as a background image. That's something that would just autoplay in the background. And what we've done is we've given them the ability to say, I want this video to play automatically. It'll add muted attribute to it. It'll add the autoplay attribute to it, and it'll just work. Or I want it to play with controls. And they have the ability to do that on the same video. They can use the same video more than once if they want to that way. As long as it's short, it doesn't affect performance too much. But that's the flexibility they have to work within the system itself as it stands. I to go over here again, now we get to the meat of it. Now we can actually show you a little bit more about what they were able to do with this system. So this is some secret stuff that they've been working on. But so again, like I said, they're working towards this exhibition. A couple of these chapters I'll show you will be coming online in the next couple weeks. A couple of them were just examples that they put together when they were playing with the system and figuring out how to break it. So I'll start with here. Now, the thing that we noticed with the way that they were using video is it was really a lot more dramatic than we expected. So they ended up going away and shooting all these videos in the museum themselves. This is the author of this particular this particular chapter. But now, as I scroll, I control the pace. So timing becomes part of the design, I feel like. This one is a little bit more, a little bit heavier content-wise. So there's a lot more text than some of the other ones, but you see how things come in very nicely. There's that idea of sticky now. Something's hitting the top of the viewport and staying there. Something else will scroll in into place. So these become like vertical scrollable galleries in a way. And then here's that option of a background image that's just auto-playing when I get to it. And as I continue to scroll, other things are coming in as well. Static images are coming in and floating on top. Again, this layering is not something that we quite expected them to come back with us, come back at. And then this is also a really nice effect. They've got these pieces of the catalog that was originally published back in 1969, and some descriptions, and other pieces come in and kind of create this stacking effect, one on top of the other. They even canted them nicely so they don't line up perfectly. That's a little strange, but they're going to do some things like that. There's some more video. A lot of these are slow, and they feel more like a meditation in a way. And some more text, some more text, some more text. So that's one sample that we ended up seeing coming back. Another one is the same system, the same components, the same colors and type styles, but a very different approach. This artist was interested in creating something that was really more like a meditation. So here, there's some audio and some video that someone can interact with, but then there's some kind of a guided meditation script becomes the content for this one. So this, again, has a very different feel than what we expected. I'm not reading a scholarly publication anymore. It's something else. It's also not New York Times Skyfall, Snowfall, or anything like that. It's a little bit different because of the kind of content that they're working with. So they're inserting audio, they're inserting video. This is a lot more paced and feels like a little bit more work to move through as I scroll. And there's a few of those kinds of sections as we go down the page. To go in a completely different direction, this one is, again, more layered and has that slow video effect, but I really was interested in the way that they were, they're almost so slow that you think they're a static image. So it becomes a little bit of discovery, like, oh, this is changing, this is doing something. Especially when we get into some of the later videos. So that's a video auto-playing with another video auto-playing that will scroll in right on top of it. And you don't know that's a video until she blinks, essentially. And they're going to have pieces of content that will come in and float on top of these kinds of things. So it becomes very, I don't know, very atmospheric almost. This one is funny. I don't know if I want to hang out until the end, but there's a little bunny. Yeah, there's a bunny in here, but then they close up on the bunny. And it makes me feel like they're doing some David Lynchian thing. I don't know why. But again, this is what happens when you give artists, there's that freaky bunny, something really powerful to work with. So they went away and created these videos, and now we've got these kinds of chapters. And now, again, same components, same thing. This is a lot more scholarly. This is an introduction. This will eventually become something oops. This will eventually be something that they're going to publish. So John is actually their director. He'll be talking about the exhibition that they'll be mounting. There's a lot of content here. But they did this thing in the middle with the sticky idea where now it's almost like you're digging through their collection. You're pulling things out of their collection and making this interesting pastiche of things that'll stick and move, and others will come in and layer on top of. So I'm just scrolling. I just keep scrolling. It's really very layered. And so far, performance, cross my fingers, has not been much of an issue. These are some videos again of yeah, unless you have a 40-minute video, exactly. This is again some more video that they shot to support the what Andy Warhol did 50 years ago. All the Polaroids and things he took of their collection to try to figure out what he was going to put together. So it becomes sort of a document of what the original exhibition was like. So these are some examples of what they've been doing. And again, I think the interesting part is that they're much more media rich than we expected. And they're very different from one to the next. They can really take the form of whatever the artist or author has decided to do with that content. So I'm excited to see what they're going to be doing with it going forward. So for some of the Drupal folks too, just a quick review of what we have under the hood that helps run this. Not a ton of things to make it work. A lot of this was built within the custom theme, but these are some things some folks might understand and know about. And then as well, I wanted to just kind of mention, Layout Builder is a fantastic tool. It is fairly new. Well, no, I take that back. It's been in core for a while, but I feel like it's been recently discovered by people. And so there's a lot more people talking about it. There's a lot more people using it. Therefore, there's a lot more community involvement than there ever has been as well. So it's great to be part of an open source community like Drupal that will help share code and help solve other people's problems together. But that means that as developers, we need to be really cognizant of what's out there. And if we encounter something that's a bug, we either want to try to find someone else who's already solved it for us or contribute that code back to the community to help someone else solve that problem later on. So there's a lot of push and pull that's happening in the community around this tool right now. The other thing I thought was interesting was because now it becomes a very, what you see is what you get interface. There's admin styles and there's front-end styles that mix in together, and that hasn't been the case before. So it just required us to do a little bit of extra work to think about how this authoring experience can be better. Can we remove all those animations that might be annoying when you're refreshing the page and working with content a bunch of times? How can we make it easier for them to use and make sure those styles don't conflict and create something that's just hard to work with on the back end? For us, our future, so this was our first project with Layout Builder. This was kind of our experiment with it. And I feel like it was really successful. One of the more successful things about it was I gave a talk 3 years ago, I think, about using a different tool, but with the same paradigms, with the same design system ideas. And so it was great to see that the way we think about design systems, the way we want to give authors all of those different options to build content, that hasn't really had to change. The tool has changed, but the ideas, the thinking behind it have not. So that's been really successful, and we're already, like I showed you with the AVMA, figuring out how we can use it for other more typical clients who don't have these huge creative needs necessarily. And like I said, being an open source shop working with Drupal, we have ideas of how we can start contributing some of the things we built for this platform back out to the community. But in a very similar fashion, the future of Ziggurat with RISD is right now there's one publication out now, so you can go to publications.risdmuseum.org and check it out. It's nothing like what I showed you in that right now it's a compendium of their audio tours, and even still, like because it's RISD, audio tour doesn't really do it justice. It's more like a podcast you listen to while you walk through the museum. It's not a turn here and go see that kind of story. So they're almost something you can listen to from afar. They're called sound walks. So that's what's up right now. But like I said, Raid the Icebox is coming. That'll be their big show in 2019, 2020. So to keep a look, check every week or so, and you'll start to see some of these bits and pieces pop up and become publicly available, some of the things that I've been showing you. Long term, I mentioned how we abstracted the color palette. That's because one of our initial conversations was, can we change the typography and the color on a publication by publication basis? Just those simple tweaks can make any publication feel vastly different than another. So one of the first things we'll be working on in phase 2 was, how can we give them the ability to change that color palette out completely and supply a new set of fonts? So now they're not stuck with the same ones again and again. They can really have a much more fluid control over what that looks like. And then we'll have some longer term conversations about how, like I said at the beginning, we can open source this whole platform and release that to other museums and other universities to do, who knows. The interesting part there is that now we can have possibly a wider community to help make this particular platform better. So someone else's needs might not be fully addressed, but with a little bit of extra work, we can build that in, and that might benefit someone else. That might come back and benefit RISD in the long term. So that's the interest there. And that was a lot, but thanks for sticking it out with me. Kathy and I are here for questions, and we'll be hanging out as well if anyone hasn't had lunch yet. But thanks for coming and taking a look. All right. Any questions come to mind about what we had gone through here? Yeah.
So what's the benefit of
Yeah. From that original thing I told you. So for the recording, the question is, what's the benefit of locking an author out? It's a few things. So the nice thing for us as site builders, the people who are putting these things together on the back end, is that we can do all of that layout in the admin itself, and it can become very flexible. And if I change that base layout in the admin and I haven't let authors modify that, it'll update wherever it's been used. So it becomes part of the system, and it's not external. It's not part of our code repo. Like, if you know a little bit more about Drupal, you have to do twig templates and CSS files and everything. You don't have to do that now. You don't have to do any custom twig templates if you don't want to. You can do a lot of that layout in the system, which makes it a lot more portable. And again, I think the power there is, oh shoot, this layout needs to change. I don't want to have to go back and change everything that's based on it. That's not a problem anymore. But you might want to lock the authors out of, I think, the simpler content types. I think articles, blog articles, and press releases are a really good example of that. They don't need to change. They don't need to be a special snowflake all the time. It's only when you have these, I think people use the term marketing pages, these like standalone pages that talk about a particular service or an event. That's when it makes sense that you really allow them to have as much flexibility as possible. Yeah. Anything else?
I've
Yeah.
been designing, and you said like you only work on the back end. How are we able to get a visual of it and actually work?
That was, yes. The question is, how were you able to get a visual of what you're doing and working with? That was really hard, frankly. That's always hard with these things. We start with, we would like to start with some sort of design, something that they think they're going to want to work towards. That could get thrown out the window, but it gives you a place to start. It gives you a place to think about, oh, okay, they'll need this option. I should make that flexible. I should make this available as you build. And as we were producing it, I created one long page much like this with every possible option I could think of on it, every background color, every column combination, video, audio, text content, whatever we wanted to put into it as a test, as a way to say, this is how everything works. This is how it works on mobile. This is how it works on desktop. But it wasn't a pretty thing, really. It was only when we trained them on how to use the system, how to build things, that we started to get much more creative and nicer looking visuals out of it. And that was part of the surprise, I think, because we didn't have content at the beginning part of the surprise was, oh, that's the content. And that's how they want to lay it out. So it worked well, but I would not say it was the easiest thing to do. It is sort of a reverse way of thinking, to design the system and not design the product.
Just to add on to that, one of the things we did is we had the wireframes. They went back and probably provided us a good 5 different variations based on the components they knew we were gonna build and give them. And they kind of laid out these very different feeling layouts with their current content to see if they could put it in our system box.
Right. Right.
And then from there, we were like, okay, their designs, we looked at it and we're like, yes, this is this component, this is that component, this is this component with a custom class on it, because it's a little one-off-ish. And we kind of looked at it that way from a design component. Yeah,
I guess the point is it became a real push-pull. It's not usually the way. Usually we're the designers, we're the UX folks, and we're helping the client realize something. This was like them pushing back on us pushing back on them, deconstructing something and figuring out how we would build it, how we'd make it flexible, when it should not be part of the system, when it should be that little custom snowflake thing, and when it should be something that we build in that they're going to probably want to use again and again and again. So yeah, it was a very collaborative process, I would say. Yeah.
How do releases within Drupal change, or does it change as you go forward, especially?
How do releases? Yeah, I mean, we have to keep abreast of layout builder breaking changes. Again, because I think it's a system now that's been in heavier use lately. It is getting more attention, and I think it's getting better all the time. We're starting to see new modules come on that are really helpful, that are either community driven or they're core driven. How they're going to affect things long term, we're not sure. But I think the great thing about Layout Builder versus something like, if you ever used Paragraphs before, Paragraphs is a contributed module that's like an external group that wants to run that and do it. That could go away tomorrow, But the fact that Layout Builder is now part of core, it's something that they've really put in heavily on. We don't see that going away, and that's one of the benefits, I think, of starting to use it. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah.
I have a quick question. So you said initially that this was an atypical project. Is it atypical because it's systems and you typically build in a product, or?
No, it's not atypical in that way. I think that's a good question in that for AVMA, we still had to come up with a design system. So we still had to come up with what the components were, even if 75% of the time we're the only ones using them. We still don't want to build everything to be a one-off. So when heroes are what they are, when headlines are what they are, when body content blocks are what they are, we don't want that to change all the time. So we still think in a very component-driven way. It just may never be exposed to the client in that way. So this was atypical, I think. And part of that was the collaboration between us, the fact that we were kind of working towards something that was fuzzy and getting tighter and tighter focus as we moved along, versus with the AVMA, our design team came up with the components. Our design team pushed and pulled prototypes and design mockups, more typical static design mockups to get client approval, and then we built it. So that kind of more waterfall approach is usually how we work. Our developers are involved in making sure that the designer is not going rogue and doing something that's going to be really hard to build, of course. But it is typically like finish designs, then start building the front end, that kind of approach. Whereas this was, we were building and prototyping and showing them what we could do, and they were saying, can it also do this, that, and that? And then we were figuring out how we can build that in and move. So it was a lot more iterative and collaborative in that way. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Anything else, anyone?
So
yeah.
You kind of have to counsel them and guide them, because
yeah.
I mean, you don't want to give them too much design power, and then it'll just ruin everything. You can't even really limit what you can do so much. You can't push through the all that stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so,
How do you?
right, the question's about limitations, and there were limitations. You know, sometimes we had to put our UX hat on and say, that would be terrible. That would be a terrible UX experience. That was part of the collaborative process for sure. The other thing in the back of our minds was accessibility. So there's not a ton of, I mean, there's whatever we get out of the box accessibility-wise here, and we've been giving it some special considerations for some of the features, but we know there's going to be more work that we need to do. So all this video content, for example, when does it require a transcript? When is it content that should be transcribed for someone who can't see it or can't hear it in some cases? And when is it just texture that we don't have to do that for? You know, they're going to have to be a lot more aware of that as they start to craft content like that. So there will continue to be conversations like that for sure. But yeah, there was a lot of push-pull around what they've seen out in the wild and what would look really cool, but like, would it make sense for them? Would it make sense for this content? Is it a good user experience? That was one of the things we had to come back to again and again, just to try to simplify it, to try to focus it, give them some cool features for sure, but not make it overblown either. Yeah.
I still love how you gave them the flexibility, but like that layering effect that you said,
So right, and that layering effect, that sticky, is one of the things I think they abused to a really great extent. We did not intentionally think that they would be making transparent parts of the page come in so they could do that layering effect, but sure, the system let them do that, obviously, and they really exploited that. So that was one of the great surprises to end up seeing in the end. Yeah. Yeah.
So if you was here from Salary University, what would you say like
cool.
you learned to like get into this?
Yeah, question about you guys are students and how would this apply, or how would you think about this in a more UX way?
Yeah, so what is the skills?
The skills? I mean, you know, soft skills are huge. The communication here was really paramount. You know, being able to, I mean, because they're a creative client, but they're not necessarily well-versed in web or what's good for the web, right? Or what's great for user experience. So we had to communicate a lot with that. We had to take some of their ideas that at first glance were like, wow, I don't know how we would do that, to distilling it down to, okay, I think what they mean is this. I think we could do this portion of that idea and then let them run with it. So it was a lot of that, a lot of communication, a lot of being able to speak in a shared design language. I think that's really important. When we say component, this is what we mean. When we say block, this is what that means. Always kind of making sure that we're defining what we're talking about so we can have a more intelligent conversation about it. That's really huge. And then on the UX side of things, like being able to see the bigger picture, see the system behind things. Every design has a system behind it. It's whether or not you turn that system to something that can further create other designs based on top of it. So being able to abstract something down to its really core pieces, which, you know, I mean, what we're doing is not rocket science. It's fairly simple. Single comms, double comms, triple comms, you know, like you've seen it before. But being able to combine them all together, I think, is what gives it that power. So yeah, it's systems thinking, which is slightly different than UX. I think that's a good way to think about how this worked. Yeah, sure. Okay, one more, go for it. Yeah.
I'm just curious, how did testing, what was the testing?
Testing, yeah.
I was gonna mention it if you want that question.
Yeah, so testing was interesting. Again, I created that big long form page in order to test as we built. But I mean, frankly, I don't know if testing's really done. You know, they're still working on their content. They're still creating things. So we always need to check back and make sure things are going the way that we expected them to. I did, just for the heck of it, check out what it looks like in IE 11. Not terrible. It works pretty well because we're not doing things that are super fancy, and we still wanted to build with best practices in mind, build with progressive enhancement. So if you can't support these things, it doesn't completely break. But we didn't either pay it any special attention. So this was more about making sure Mobile browsers worked really well on fairly modern phones, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all the typical browsers. But it was hard because we didn't have the real content to test with. So we really had to try to create the use cases, create the edge cases, and test those to make sure that we were covering our bases. Yeah.
Even though we didn't have to test for IE11, which you're like, that must have saved you a ton of time. But we got to use new things that actually don't work around current browsers all the time the same. So between Chrome, Firefox, and Safari on the Mac, we had sticky acting slightly different.
Right.
So we got rid of the IE frustration, but got to work on some new future
frustrations. Yeah, potentially. No, that's true. We did, because we were trying to use new things, trying to keep the code lean and mean and leverage what the browsers do better nowadays. Like Kathy said, they're not always the same. And that either the client had to be okay with those slight variations, or we had to figure out, okay, has anyone else documented this? Has anyone else been seeing this? Or is it just us? Like, how are we using it wrong? And I think I did some digging on Mozilla's bug reports to find what we were seeing, and it did end up being like, did it save us time? I don't know, but it was more fun to be able to do that for sure.
It sounds like a lot of the testing was done in shop, and it's smart.
Yeah, definitely. Well, so part of our process is we have something called a bug bash, where we just get in a room and we bang on it for a couple hours with as many different devices as we can. We do that first, and then we hand it over to the client and say, okay, you do the same thing with the devices that you typically use. And that did uncover probably 90% of the things that we needed to uncover. We did that as soon as we could. But again, I think the biggest part is just not having the content really, like, it's a shot in the dark. Hopefully that means that we've covered all our bases, and we'll just find that one thing that maybe we forgot to cover, or that they've used in a way that we didn't expect. Yeah.
What's that testing called? Bug bash?
Bug bash, yeah, we call it a bug bash. Yeah. And that's what it is. Like, it's really literally like bang on it and try to break it. Yeah. I think
Somebody's browsers are going to mess it up for you.
Yeah, something's always going to mess it up. Something's always going to spoil the party a little bit. But one of the future things I didn't mention, which I think is kind of interesting. So there's a print button, right? But the print just is going to print what you see on the screen, which isn't super useful. We've made some adjustments to the print style sheet to make it feel more useful. But I think we could do a lot more there. And then that opens up the possibility of, like, oh, well, maybe that's a reading mode. Maybe there's this interactive reading mode, but then we can switch. It's not necessarily when I hit the print button does it switch, but I can physically say, I don't want all this crazy stuff. Just give me something more legible. And you switch the template basically, and now all the content is black and white with no crazy colors and no crazy video. That's a way to experience the same content in a much different fashion. That could get at accessibility problems, and that could just get at someone's initial, frustration with what they're doing. Like, no, just give me the content, So we're exploring ideas like that too going forward. That I think it's interesting for a museum. I think that's typically wants to create a book and deliver a book and have that be final. To say, no, if the user could say, I like this, I don't like that, and change our content, the fact that they're open to that is really cool. All right, well, cool. We're at 1:15 for anyone who worries about that. Thanks a lot, everyone coming and listening in as well. Like I said, the recording will be available. I'll spread that around too if you have anyone else that might be interested in this kind of thing. But thanks a lot for coming. All right.